Yep, and welcome everybody to Senate Transportation. See some new faces, so welcome to the committee. Just as a reminder, make sure you silence any and all electronic devices and address the chair as you come up to testify. So that being said, let's go ahead and do some roll call.
Senator Brennan,
Here.
Senator Furphy,
Here.
Senator Kolb,
Excused.
Senator Pappas,
Here.
Chairman Boner.
Here.
Okay, 4 present. We have a quorum.
Okay, so first up, we have Senate File 21. Director Reiner, welcome back to Senate Transportation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director of WYDOT. The first bill I think we're considering tonight from the Transportation Department, and again, was one from the interim is Senate File 21 dealing with high occupancy vehicle lanes. Let me maybe just provide a little history here. So Highway 22 is the highway that connects Jackson and Idaho. So if you're in Jackson and you head west over Teton Pass, you're going on Highway 22. And for all 2-lane roads in our state, it certainly has the most what we would call ADT, average daily traffic, and it is congested. If you've ever driven that, specifically during the summer, during the day, you wish you were not on that road because it reminds you of other places in our nation that are congested. We are in the process of designing what a rebuilt Highway 22 looks like. And it was enough of an issue that as a director, I actually moved up that design process by about 2 years to kick it off and get that process going. As we've worked with the county and the city of Jackson, and I must say that we've got really some excellent relations up there and in terms of working the issues. And as we've talked about, the design process, a lot of that involves involvement with the communities, and that's all part of what we call the NEPA process. And the sort of the environmental, study of what's going on. We don't know what the end solution will look like for that road. Currently it's 2 lanes. The question is it going to be 3 lanes? Is it going to be 4 lanes? Is it going to be 5 lanes? We don't know. But here's what the community has asked, is they said, we would like to consider an HOV lane in the design. To which I said, okay, today we can designate an HOV lane from the department perspective. However, what we cannot do is our law enforcement cannot write a ticket and cannot enforce the actions on it. It can't enforce. If somebody gets in an HOV lane and they only have themselves in a rig, we can't enforce it, can't arrest it. So I said, for us to consider a solution, it must be lawful, and we've got to be able to execute it. And so that was really the background of this bill, is to set into conditions the ability of our law enforcement in the state to enforce an HOV designation so that it could be considered, in this case, in Highway 22. That doesn't mean we'll have them there, but we can have them in our mind unless it's legal. So that's the background on here, and really with that, would be happy to really walk you through the bill, or if you'd like to take some other testimony first, Mr. Chairman, that's certainly up to you.
Yeah, let's go ahead and walk through the bill.
Okay, thank you. So if we just start on page 1, certainly is the introduction, and then the at the bottom of page 1, section 1, paragraph 31.5-238, line 12 and 13, talks about the designation of a high occupancy lane and sets up the penalties. And basically what that says is, hey, the department, I'm flipping over to page 2, starting at line 1, that the director or an appropriate local authority may designate, a portion of a road that's under their jurisdiction as a high occupancy vehicle lane. And then starting at line 6, it goes into what type of vehicles may operate in that high occupancy lane. What it says is that motorcycles, bicycles, and public transportation vehicles may always operate in an HOV lane. It goes on to Romanet number 2, then that says on line 14, that says that any vehicle making a turn, that you can be in there, even if you only have one person. And why is that important? Because it is possible that if the HOV lane is on the outside, that somebody may have to get into that lane to make a right-hand turn. And so you will physically have to be in that lane to turn. So that's authorized. Then Romanet C talks about the department will implement, shall devise the rules to provide for the design, operation, maintenance, and required signage of the HOV lane. And then in subparagraph D, it gets into the penalty portion on page 22, on page 2, line 22, and then goes over to page 3, line 1, 2, and 3, where basically it says, and this is the meat of the material here, is that any person who operates a vehicle in an HOV lane that's not, defined as an HOV vehicle, and we'll get to the definitions here in a sec, is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by a penalty, and it refers to a current Wyoming statute for that penalty. So that's where we set up the authority to establish an HOV lane, and more importantly, the authority to enforce it. And then we flip down into the middle of page 3, line 11, where it talks about definitions. And it basically says, it defines on line 16 what a high occupancy vehicle is. And that really gets to be a no fewer than 2 people in the vehicle. And then we slip down to line 20, and it talks about the definition of a high occupancy vehicle lane. And really, it's a lane that says it's for the exclusive use of defined HOV vehicles or those accepted on page 2 that we already went over.
Okay, Director, I think we have a question right now.
Yeah, I just want to go back to line 16 through 18 on the no fewer than 2 persons or as provided by department rule. My understanding there is that if the department wanted to up that to 3 people, that gives them the authority to do that. Just want to make sure that that's the intent.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, that's exactly the intent. I'm pretty comfortable with 2. I think in some parts of the country, they've raised it. And I think that all depends on what you're trying to achieve in terms of traffic control. Moving on then to page 4, what you see on lines 2, starting on line 2 is the definition of a public transport vehicle. And remember, that was one of the vehicles that certainly we want on there and is great interest in the community to have on there. And you can really walk through line 4 through 8, a vehicle that provides transportation by bus or other conveyance that provides the general public with general or special service on a regular and continuing basis. And then on line 10, starting with Bowlegs B, a vehicle that it's got to be operated by a public entity or under a contract with a public entity or really school bus. And the whole point there is to really facilitate mass transit in this case, in the terms of having buses and multiple occupants in a vehicle. And that's certainly a priority in this case of that community. However, obviously, the bill is set up to be statewide. And then we move over to page 5, starting at line 2, authorize emergency vehicles. And really, if you look down to the modification made to that chapter, is on line 12, where it allows emergency vehicles to be in high occupancy vehicle lanes, which obviously I think is what you want. And then on the bottom of page 5, starting on line 15, we have to modify a little bit on driving on the right hand of the roadway exceptions. And what we see there is you flip over to page 6, is it adds an exception that says, hey, you don't have to always drive on the right-hand side of the road if it happens to be, the left-hand line happens to be the HOV lane, because remember, our requirement of the state is really to drive in the right-hand lane as often as you can. This would change that rule. And then again, we'd have to make the same type of provision on line 8 on page 6, which deals with driving on the left. And you can see again the exception for being in an HOV lane. Mr. Chairman, that's a quick run through of the bill. We do have one amendment that we have actually worked with some individuals interested in that part of the country. I'd be happy to talk that if you'd like at this point.
Yeah, let's go ahead and make sure that's, just describe what it is for the public's sake.
Okay.
And, yeah.
So if I go back to page 2, on line 1 through 4, the recommended change for the public would be on line 2 to delete the first roadway, so that the sentence reads, the director or a local authority may designate any part of a roadway and then, or specific lane of a roadway. And then that stands as it is. And then on line 4, delete the period after lane and add in the following: except the director or a local authority may not designate the only available lane of travel in a given direction as a high occupancy vehicle lane. And so actually that was a nice catch. And what that does is that really what that says is, if you have a 2-lane road, you may not designate either side of that as an HOV lane, because that would preclude non-HOV people from being in there. So it's sort of common sense, but here it's applied to statute. That was a recommendation, and we thought it was a good one.
Okay, thank you, Director. Any questions, committee, for the bill or the proposed amendment? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I must be missing something, or perhaps the definition is needed in other parts of the statute, but the definition for public transportation vehicle, I don't see that it's used anywhere in this language. Am I missing it? Or is that definition needed because there's some of these other referred statutes? Like, I don't know why we have the definition of a public transportation vehicle. I mean, we have a whole page just for that. Frankly, I don't know why.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, that's a good question that the answer is not coming to me immediately. I would probably ask the white-out gentleman to my rear if they have an answer. Otherwise, let me keep looking and maybe we could ask another question.
Mr. Chairman? Just another comment. And if it's a transportation vehicle,
Yeah.
what does it matter whether it's public or not public? Because it's going to have more than 2 people in it. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Pappas, I think I found what it, in fact, thank you, Mr. Dehoff. On page 2, line 9, it says motorcycles, bicycles, and public transportation vehicles may operate. And so I think there is a feeling required this, hey, we got to have the definition of public transport vehicles. And I had thought that was in there somewhere, yeah.
Again, my question is, why would we even need it unless we're allowing a bus with just the driver to go down the road? Maybe that's the case, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman,
ahead,
Senator Pappas, I think that was the intent, was to basically saying, hey, you know, this is the definition of public transport vehicle, because I think there is a fear of some shenanigans in that space. And so here's an HOV lane, and we say public transportation, you know, vehicle, and here's the definition of what that is.
I think I can understand the need for that and say a larger municipality where one would have multiple HOV lanes going both ways. You want to facilitate the quick transportation of that public transit, even if they don't have passengers. I guess if we're talking about one road, Teton County, I'd defer to somebody else to, explain the utility of that. But once again, committee, this is something that's going to statutes. It's something that's going to be law, I imagine, for a while, and may not be best to judge based off a specific circumstance. But
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Help me to understand why the term on page 2, the bicycles are included there. Seems to me then if you have high occupancy vehicles and you're maybe increasing the speed, you would have to have a bicycle lane in any high occupancy vehicle lane. Am I understanding that right? What am I missing there? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, I think the discussion on the bicycles again had to do with what lane you might choose to be the HOV lane. So bikes have to have, you want bikes as far to the right as you can, typically. And so, and they are authorized to ride in a lane of traffic. They, as much as sometimes as we wish they wouldn't. And so what we see then is if the HOV lane is on the far right, there's a chance that you'll have a bicycle in there. We hope they're on the shoulder, but really what's happening here is it's possible that if the HOV lane is on the right-hand side of, the road and they're riding with traffic, as they're directed to do, it's possible they may be in that lane. And so this would make it not a misdemeanor punishable under, the penalty for them to be in that lane.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Furphy, we hope that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. It almost seems like you're saying we got to have bicycle lanes in those roadways. If we're going to allow bicycles on, I'm used to seeing some of these, particularly in our state south of us, those lanes, those vehicles are going fast in that lane designed for them. I wouldn't want to see a bicycle on there, and that's my concern. And what I'm saying is, I hope we're not creating bicycle lanes on each one of those roadways.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, I think maybe the way to think about it would be it's possible, since this is a bill for the entire state, that there could be HOV lanes designated inside communities, which would be slower. And it's very possible then, specifically depending on sidewalk natures and where cars are parked, that there could be a bicycle in that lane. I think that's where my mind went, is the 22 may not be a great example for this particular case. It could be another type of road, specifically lower speed and in a community.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Go ahead.
What if we take that out of there? Eliminate, so leaving motorcycles in public transportation, then, let's see, public transportation vehicles. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, my initial response to that would be, I recommend that for now we leave that in there. So I do think it was certainly worked during the interim. That question came up during testimony about why that's there. I think there'll be potentially some other witnesses tonight who may be able to testify to that to a greater extent. But right now, certainly that was a request to keep that in there, and we can amend it out later. But I for now would recommend that we leave that in there, because I think there are some applications where that is actually important.
Any further questions? Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was mentioned that in the process that the communities that are looking to need to expand their roadways would like to consider those HOV lanes. But what was the reasoning for that they gave?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Brennan, well, really the reason is the possibility of speeding up the transit of lots of people. And so HOV lanes will typically do that for you. I mean, if you can get, high occupancy vehicle lanes and you can get vehicles in there that are traveling faster, you can actually speed up that lane. It may slow down the other, but if the goal is to move a lot of people, and that's the case, and that's why you see HOV lanes often, then it should help with the congestion issue. And certainly in the right application, it can. And that's part of why you say, I don't know if that's going to be the solution in this case or not, but it can't be the solution if it's not an option. And what this bill does is create the option.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Looks like we have Senator Drew here. You have anything to say, Senator?
Always has something to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Seatmate, members of the committee. I'm Mike Carew, Senate District 17. I thank you for offering a chance to speak. I don't really have much to say, except that this bill, while it came out of Teton County as a request, talking to the good folks at WYDOT, as the general mentioned, and I do appreciate the work we do with WYDOT, and everyone in Teton County appreciates the work that WYDOT does. But this bill is a statewide bill and has statewide implications. And I was with you in August or July and whenever it was in Rock Springs, and we talked about it. And folks in Rock Springs think it may have applicability for the road between Rock Springs and Green River. There are other communities around the state that in the next few years, even this one might see the application. Folks in Natrona County have talked about it. So it's a statewide bill with a statewide implication. All it does is all it takes is a can of paint to make an HOV lane, but it takes this bill to give it teeth to make sure that it actually works. So I urge your support of this bill and be glad to stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions for Senator Guru? Thanks,
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr.
it.
Chairman.
I also see former Representative Schwartz. Come on down. Welcome back. Good to see you. Yeah.
Swapped his.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is different. It's good to see those of you I know. I'm not familiar with Senator Brennan, but I was a legislator. So I am speaking to, my name is Andy Schwartz. I am speaking to you on behalf of the town of Jackson. And this is one of their highest priorities in this legislative session. I really don't have much to add to the previous comments, although Senator Furphy, I would add, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that in terms of the bicycles in Teton County, all of the roads we're considering potentially for HOV already have dedicated bike lanes. So I think it's more an issue of when they need to make a left-hand turn or something like that. The bikes prefer the pathways, without a doubt. Other than that, I stand for any questions and urge you to pass the bill.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Schwartz? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional public comment? Come on down, sir.
Mr. Chairman. My name is Bob McLaurin. I'm with WHAM. I represent 97 of the other cities besides Jackson. Actually, Jackson's a member as well, but we do support this bill as well. Thank you very much.
Any questions for the Association of Municipalities? Thank you, sir. Any additional public comment? Feel free, come on down, sir. Yeah, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mark Moody, Precinct 37 for Laramie County Republican Party.
Marilyn Burton, Precinct Committee Woman for Laramie County 4-9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We're both opposed to this mainly because I sent you a document. HOV lanes are starting to be phased out. The reason the foundation said that, most of them are being underutilized. There's actually more problems because what happens is there's an empty lane syndrome and cause more traffic. You look at Denver, and I've traveled there several times. They actually causes more even pollution. So if you're an environmentalist, the car idolizes, they actually cause more traffic jams. And then they actually, if you look at the document there, it says a 2018 study found that 84% of vehicles in Tennessee's HOV lanes are violators. So they're violating it. And we looked at the map of where it is in Teton County. This is a pretty mountainous area. So, when it's the winter time, how are you going to be able to travel? Let's say it's the only safe space to travel there. So it's only, I heard it was used in the summertime. That's only 2 months out of the year. It's not like it is in Florida where it would be year round. And then just the other thing too is most of the state, we're the least populated state. I mean, we're not Colorado or Utah. They have more population than us. It would just cause more hassle, especially on I-80 and I-25. I know here in Cheyenne, we definitely have a rush hour, but it's not that much, and really traffic's not that bad. I even been on rush hour in Casper, so that's pretty much the reason why I'm opposed to it.
Mr. Chairman and committee, one question that I didn't have answered as I was listening today is, will there be additional construction costs? Because when I think HOV, I think the third lane in Denver, and I can see where during the summer months, there would be all sorts of extra traffic because tourism is, you have 1 million+ visitors go through the park in the Jackson area. So a 2-lane highway, will there be construction costs that will be associated with this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for your testimony. I do appreciate any questions, committee, before you go. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further public comment? Oh, Mr. Winnie, come on down, then we'll get to, okay, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Much as I hate to admit it, I grew up and learned to drive in the Washington, D.C. area in the 60s. I saw the introduction of HOV lanes, and their purpose was to bring commuters in from 15 to 20 miles out down to center town. I can't imagine Wyoming has that kind of situation. I've seen the introduction of it down in Denver. I have a son that lives down there in that area. We don't have any towns big enough with satellite commuter towns around them to have this be useful. I've heard people say that this is in part put up by people out in the Jackson, Wyoming area. And if you were going to put a third HOV lane out there, probably down the Snake River Canyon, I don't know where you're going to put that lane. There's not enough room. As a result, I find myself wondering why this bill is even in front of you. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any questions, committee? Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Jensen, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Jensen with the law firm of Holland and Hart. We represent the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort and the Teton Valley Association. A lot of comments here, and I'll be brief. The main reason for this is it enables there to be the enforcement of an HOV lane. This has already been stated. It doesn't say that there is going to be an HOV lane. So this just enables, if there is an HOV lane, it can be used and used appropriately. There is a lot of traffic year-round on this road in Teton County. This is a statewide bill. There aren't really any other places where this would impact immediately. And again, this isn't immediate either, because there still has to be a lot of study on whether or not the HOV lane can work. But if it can, it has to be able to be enforced. And this is the first step in a long road with a lot of traffic that we need to be able to do that. So we'd appreciate your support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jensen. Any questions, committee? Okay, thank you, sir. Any additional public comment in the room? Okay, anybody online? Go ahead and raise your hand if you're on Zoom.
Mr. Chairman, we have one individual online, but with not a hand up.
Okay, very good. Okay, we'll give a little bit more time for that, and just one more chance. Anybody in the room wants to testify on this Senate File 21? Okay, if there's no online comment, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Senator Pappas.
Second.
Second by Senator Furphy. Any discussion or amendments? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, frankly, I don't have any changes to the bill. I mean, we worked it through committee, through the interim, and while, you know, I agree with a lot of the comments that I heard about HOV lanes in urban areas. They are a problem. A lot of them, if you look at what happened down in Colorado with the T-Rex project, and, you know, they built out 19 some miles of road and widened it, and in 5 years they filled it up again, and it is a problem in our urban areas. The issue, though, is not what we're trying to, that's not the issue we're trying to solve here in Wyoming. The issue is to, particularly in Teton County, is to be able to get that mass transit coming, you know, to the people to downtown, from Idaho, I guess, to downtown Jackson, and to create a lane. Whether the lane's there or not, all this does is give us a tool, because I do the comment about enforceability is absolutely spot on. If we don't enforce it, it doesn't do any good. So if this goes in, the patrol is going to have to do its due diligence to enforce it, or we waste our money doing it. I particularly think that the cost of putting a lane out, you know, maybe, you know, typically a lot of times it's a third lane, and it changes directions, you know, in the morning versus the afternoon. That's all details. Costs are all details in the future. But if we don't have the enforcement piece, it's all for naught. So I think it's just another tool in the tool belt. I don't see any negative repercussions for passing this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, I like what Senator Pappas says. I understand the concerns of those opposed to this bill, but I think that we need to allow for options within the state as Teton County looks at what they're going to do and what's going to best fit their needs. I want to be able to give them the option to do what's best.
And before we get to Senator Kolb here soon, just a reminder, we do have an amendment that was originally proposed by staff as more of a technical correction, but has since been refined, just as a reminder to the committee. But go ahead, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, sorry I missed the first half of this rodeo. I would have liked the chance to comment, but I was trapped doing something else. I'm a little concerned about, or confused really about Jackson. Now, let's say we're going to ram all that traffic in there faster. Now, my observation as being someone who's gone up there is you can't get through town. I mean, this isn't some exit that comes off of interstate. This is actually a destination where it dumps into town. So I'm wondering where all these folks are going to be cleared from. And on top of that, we got motorcycles and bicycles that are going to be allowed in a HOV lane. Is that what that means? They're not going to be, they're exempt from, I guess, getting a ticket. So in this, I drive a lot around this state. And I drive down the road and I can tell you what, you got semis. You got semis, if we're lucky, they're in the right lane. And you ain't getting around them unless you have a HOV vehicle with the right amount of people, occupants in it. So you're trapped. You're trapped for a long ways. And I see that as being really problematic. But more importantly, I know it came from Teton and they're trying to clear the traffic problems, and I appreciate that. But I see this a road to nowhere. I mean, you're jamming them all in more quickly, and they're going to back up. I mean, I think in Wyoming we're so unique because we don't have a bypass or an exit. It's going to just be problematic, and I don't know how this is really going to help us solve that problem. And frankly, I'm afraid if we make it a law and we start making people, punishment by a misdemeanor here, for what? For being in a state with 2 lanes, mostly 2 lanes, with semis all over the place? I can't get aboard this. I mean, maybe I'm a little handicapped here, but I've read the bill before, but I'm just confused about where we're going to go with this and why it's really needed at the end of the day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion on our amendments? Go ahead.
I'll go ahead and move the amendment that was passed out to us to change lines 1 through 4 on page 2 to the language that was passed out.
Okay, and just for the public's benefit, that's the exact same language that the director explained here during his testimony. So, okay, any discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And motion carries, and just want to make sure our staff has a copy of that, and we're good to go. Okay, we're back on the bill. Any further discussion?
Question on the bill.
Okay, let's go and do a roll call.
Senator Brennan? Aye. Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator Kolb?
No.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Chairman Boner?
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
Do we have a volunteer to take this one on the floor?
Can certainly do it.
Okay, well, I'll do it.
Okay,
How about
you
that?
do it?
I'll give it a shot there. Okay, thank you, everybody. For Senate File 21, next up is Senate File 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communications System Funding. Director, you're back up on the spotlight here, or wherever you designate. County Commissioner. Okay, sounds good. Mr. Ryman, you're up. Okay, welcome, Director. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Appreciate the opportunity to address you on this important issue. This is a topic that the County Commissioners Association agreed to take some leadership on and try and identify a series of possible solutions to funding this critical system. And what we committed to in particular was to identify a sustainable long-term funding solution for the maintenance and software system upgrades for all users, not just counties or local governments, but all users of the WildLink system. Our secondary objective in that was to, if possible, identify 1 or more options that could support the WildLink system as a whole, which includes the infrastructure backbone of this critical system across the state. I brought forward to the Transportation Committee a variety of different options. I also presented them a report relative to funding mechanisms that other jurisdictions across the country are using. That report was given to the committee and included options such as appropriation of state or local funds, system user fees, 911 surcharges, bonds, special taxes, other funding streams such as traffic ticket fees and vehicle surcharges, public-private partnerships, and leasing systems, as well as grants. Some of those are possible systems or mechanisms to help fund the system. Some of those options have been before you as a body before and have received great pushback from many, and you may hear from some of those entities. The committee ultimately identified two options to advance this legislative session. This is one of those options, and this particular bill does three things. The first part is an appropriation of $8.6 million. And for your background on that figure, if you look at the current biennial budget that we're operating under, that amount generally equates to exactly what was in the biennial budget for WildLink system, not including the ARPA appropriations that were put forward. So that's the basis of that dollar figure. And you see here that it would be effective for a portion of this biennium and revert as necessary. The real key component of this, in addition to the appropriation, is the language that you find on page 2, lines 3 through 6, that indicates that this appropriation, it's your intent that this appropriation should be a part of the standard budget. So there would be no question about the fact that we are going to fund this system moving forward as part of the standard budget, obviously subject to your appropriations as you would see fit. The other critical component is found on page 2 through the rest of the bill, starting on line 8, and it sets the priority for usage of this funding. The first priority being operations and maintenance, including offsetting any charges of local government users of the system. That's, again, the first priority that the WCCA had for this endeavor. And then you see that it would then be available, any of remaining funding would be available for other activities like acquisition or lease and maintenance of state and local government user equipment, infrastructure development, expansion, and other expenses. Mr. Chairman, what I would say is this is about putting Wyoming's public safety communications system on solid footing and ensuring that there's no question moving forward about which system will connect Wyoming's first responders, whether they're public or private. Obviously, I'm here to represent your public partners at the county level, and I've got my statewide partners here on either side. But remember, there are many private entities that also connect to this system, whether they're protecting people in our mines, in our oil and gas fields, and elsewhere, as well as many other users, and we can certainly talk about that if necessary. It also will allow for the counties to focus on investing in the system, investing in the towers in their communities, some of which have been built with county funds and continue to be maintained as part of this system. And it'll also allow for my counties to no longer be in that precarious position of, are we going to switch back to analog systems, which is exactly what we don't want to have happen in this state. That will be a disservice to, again, our first responders and to connecting people to the needed services that they need. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly stand for questions, and got a couple of very knowledgeable gentlemen to either side of me as well on this issue.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Rahman? Senator Cole.
Oh, thank you, Chairman Boner. Well, good evening, Director Rahman. Question I have is, I guess, maybe you could say it like, how much are the county's local government putting in towards the system? So we've got, what, 8.6 million identified here with the state. What part of the mix do local governments put in that maybe I don't see here? I was a commissioner when all this was going on, and I've never been really fond of the original way it happened. So
Sure.
what do we have like locally? Is it skin in the game, or what percentage is not really identified by the 8.6 million? Thank you, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, this particular appropriation obviously comes from the state. And if memory serves me correct, it comes from the general fund in terms of the 8.6 that's in this bill. As it stands right now, and this has been the case for a number of years, the local governments are contributing in the current budget just over $4 million of the existing appropriation. That comes from the mineral royalty grant that would otherwise be available for local governments to obtain your assistance in emergency issues. So that's the skin in the game that exists in the current budget. But I think that's also, where, or I think that's a shortcoming of what we would consider the contribution. Local governments are also buying equipment to be able to connect into the system. So your county, when you were a commissioner, you were purchasing radios, you were purchasing other connective equipment into that system. That was at your cost. That wasn't at with the assistance of the state. Many counties have stood up towers as part of this system. I don't have a hard count. Maybe the gentleman to my right in particular could give you that number. But a number of counties own and operate and continue to maintain at their expense towers on the system. We do have one county that has elected to go a different direction. But we are working collaboratively to ensure that they're interoperable systems. So there is a lot of elements of skin in the game. What we're talking about here in particular is that operations and maintenance of this system and ensuring that that's funded moving forward. This, although if there was enough funding could be used for local governments, I suspect that it would be chewed up with other activities, and local governments would continue to have to invest in those radios, in those towers as we build out the system further. There's one other part I was going to mention relative to this. If it comes back to me, I'll try and bring that forward. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask, how have the expenses increased over the years, say the last 5 years? The cost of operating this system, how much has it increased? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can phone a friend, I'll ask YDOT to provide their response to that. This is their system primarily.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, currently for the operations and
Can you go ahead
maintenance,
and identify yourself for the record?
I am sorry, Nathan Smolinski, CTO for YDOT. Currently, the operations and maintenance, we are under a contract until 2026. We signed that contract back in 2020. So we are still basically operating operations and maintenance on that 2020 type of figure on the contract. On average, it's roughly about 3% per year we go up. If we were to take a look at the contract in a whole from 2020 to 2026, it's about $3 million per year. And just as a reminder, Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, operations and maintenance, there's no capitalization included in that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I did have the other point that I just wanted to make here. Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I think it's really important to remember that this system is not just the state and counties and municipalities that are using it. Our school districts use this system. We want them to use this system, frankly. Our game and fish department, other entities of that nature use it. Some of our mines connect into the system. So right now, the cost of this system is being borne by the state and local governments. To date, the schools have not contributed to the costs of the towers, the system. So I just wanted to express that we feel we're putting our skin in the game. We're going to continue to do that. But this is a critical service, and it's something that needs to come from the general fund at the end of the day.
Any questions, committee? Before we get back to Senator Colby, I just want to make sure I understand what's the current annual appropriation from the state's perspective, and how, just so we have an idea of what that looks like in relationship to over $8 million.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm trying to, you might have a better, there are several line items of appropriations, just over $4.4 million, probably closer to $4.2 million is state funding, which goes to the system. The 4.1 is the MRG funding that I mentioned, which covers the local portion of it. That's operations and maintenance. There is then investment at towers, and you all made an investment of, I believe, $35 million of ARPA funding towards the system this past session and for the biennium.
And very good. So just follow up real quick. What is do you anticipate that relationship between state and local government changing in terms of who's paying for ongoing operations if we pass this bill? Put in other ways, let's say 8.6 million meant to supplant the MRG funds they're currently using for the local government side, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, I proposed as one option before the committee during the interim that you would make that MRG appropriation permanent moving into the future. Obviously, that's dependent on appropriations from you and investments in the account that depends on. And but that's certainly something that was proposed during the interim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on the biennium. Am I reading this right for what it would cost in a 2-year stint? Because that looks like the 8.6, correct me if it's not listed quite right, is for 1 year. So it's 17.2 million in a biennium.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the number was not something that I brought forward. It would be for the second half of this biennium. That's correct.
And if the bill passes this committee, we'll certainly be in front of appropriations next. So any further questions, committee? Okay, go ahead. White Dot has some testimony. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me maybe kick off, and then I'll throw it over to Mr. Smolinski. Let me certainly start by thanking Mr. Riemann and the WCCA for their leadership on this. This is certainly something we've been, it's not new to this body to be talking about funding for this system. And we do have a couple slides I wouldn't mind walking through just to remind everybody, but we don't have to. And based on time, maybe we won't. But let me just.
I think hopefully everybody understands how the basics of the system, and we'll just move forward.
Let me just, maybe just a couple comments from me. One is this is one of 5 or 6 operational areas that WYDOT has. And when we start looking at how this system is funded, we currently, it's constitutionally okay to take road money and put it to this system. But this system has gone way beyond the original, let's talk on the road, let's have an interoperable system for the big components of the state. We are now well over 500 agencies that are on this system, over 12 million times a year the button gets pushed in this basically critical communication system that could save your life. And so it's important, in my mind, for us to find a long-term sustainable funding source like Mr. Reedman talked about. And we are currently taking money off the road from, our other responsibilities at YDOT to put to this system, which is part of our task. And so we will, but really I see it as a policy issue for this state in terms of what's the long-term funding for this system. Mr. Chairman, that's probably enough for me, except to say that really the ability for fund this over the long term, I see it as key. The system has grown and evolved. We're 15 years into it. It's how we talk. It's how your kids talk when they're on their school bus. It's got better comms reliability than your cell phone, because basically almost every road that you're on in this state has WyoLink coverage on it. And there's a couple places that we're adding right as we speak to enhance the comms. Mr. Chairman, let me see if Mr. Smolinski has anything to add, just in overall comments there, Mr. Smolinski.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify a few comments that were made earlier, one of the questions was regarding the 8.6 million. That is going to be for FY 24 and 25. FY 23 is currently funded through MRG funds. And then also there was a question in regards to the amount of towers that the local agencies have stood up and support on their own. Currently, the number is 9 across multiple counties. And we actually have 2 counties which are investing to build 3 additional towers as we speak. So with that, the system continues to grow. We still have more users coming onto it pretty much as their funding permits them to do so.
Okay, so you mentioned it's for fiscal year 25. Where in the bill is that? Do you have a page and line number?
Actually, that's on the fiscal note. I don't know if that's supplied with yours or not.
Okay, right. And so just to be clear, I think that fiscal note helps, and it gets that par on page 2, lines 3 through 6, where this would be an ongoing appropriation. That's actually a really important part of the bill. I know we like to focus on a dollar figure. So, but to be clear, we have, 8.6 million for the next fiscal year, then it'll be cut in half on an annual basis, and that 8.6 million will turn into a biennial appropriation. So just be clear about how that works. So, and I guess maybe just a brief explanation, why is that? Why are we spending twice as much money next fiscal year than cutting it in half? Anybody has any background on that? I'd benefit from understanding that.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe we're spending more next fiscal year. This would match the appropriation for this fiscal year.
Right, and so my comment was, for next fiscal year, we'll be spending 8.6 million. In the fiscal years after that, it would be cut in half.
Sorry.
According to our fiscal note. Go ahead.
It's a biennial figure that would be applied to the next biennium, as Mr. Smolinski is stating. So it would be a match of the current biennium's appropriation for the next biennium. I apologize for saying fiscal year.
Okay. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then why do you need 8.6 million in 1 year if it's actually for a biennium normally? Is there money that won't be expended in some other part of the budget that would offset this money that is obviously for a biennium that's going to be spent in its entirety in 1 year?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I do not have that answer. The contract would not demand that we expend $8.6 million in 1 year. The way that I'm reading the fiscal note is how it's broken down there for 24 and 25. And that's where I'm seeing it on the note. And again, I don't know if, Mr. Chairman, if you have that fiscal note, but I'd be more than happy to share it.
Right, and that's, it's a fiscal note that's generating the questions, and so probably something that we could talk about in appropriations for sure. So, Senator Kolb.
And a follow-up question. Has there been any progress made in unnecessary chatter on the buses that are driving around using WyoLink? Has anybody been looking at that? There was an issue about, improper use of the radios, or let's just say not needed use of the radios for any official purpose. could you update, I guess, on what has happened since I last knew about this?
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
Senator Kolb, I'd be happy to. The short answer is absolutely yes. We've actually stood up the WiLink office as WiDOT with some WiLink trainer, some user training. And with that, when agencies are coming on board, we're making sure that we review the proper talk that's supposed to be on this mission critical system. Part of what we've also taken a close look at is, without getting too technical, what needs to be shared. So there's a conversation that you and I could be having that maybe the rest of the community doesn't have to have, and we don't need that to be on the entire system. So that's been a focal point that we discussed in the training.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Any further public comment? Feel free to come on down. If you are online and want to testify on this bill, feel free to raise your hand so we can identify you. But any further public comment?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jerry Parker, Fire Warden and Administrator for Park County Fire District 2. I'm here representing the Wyoming Fire Service as a whole, and we support this bill and would appreciate your support in moving it forward. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, sir. Any questions for the fire warden? Appreciate your testimony. Thank you, sir. Mr. Obermuller, come on down.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Pete Obermuller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, just want to register our support for the bill. I'm old enough to remember when the discussion was whether or not WiLink even worked. I'm glad we're at the point where we can finally talk about how to sustain it. It's critical to our oil fields that are out where we need to be able to communicate if there's an emergency.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the Petroleum Association? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Ms. Levin, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jody Levin. I'm here on behalf of Verizon and Charter. This is a debate that my clients have been in. I have been in for a very long time, because one of the proposals for a number of years for funding source for WiLink was to put an assessment on customer phone bills. So we have argued for years that that is not a transparent fee. It's a tax. Customers don't like it. So I'm actually delighted to see the bill before you, because it acknowledges that this is government's interoperable communication system and that this should be funded by the government. So I stand in support of the bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Verizon or Charter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any further public comment? Welcome, Mr. Overcoat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Byron Odikoven, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, rising in support of the bill, and would echo the comments that it is important to have a sustainable, long-term, clear guidance for funding of the system that we all participate in. We talk about skin in the game and locals. We could spend a lot of time up and talk about millions of dollars over the course of the years going into the system from locals. But the overwhelming issue that we're at for today is that maintenance, that unified, centralized maintenance, to ensure that that is done correctly across the system. And the way that's done is functioning through WiDOT. You've taken steps over the course of the last several years. You've engaged the PSCC. You've done lots of things to centralize that control, supervision, and authorization into a single point of contact that's now bringing you this important piece of maintenance for the long term. So would ask for your favorable consideration in doing just that, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, thanks, sir. Any questions for the sheriffs and chiefs of police? Appreciate the testimony. Any further public comment? Come on down.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer with Wyoming School Boards Association. Just want to reaffirm that schools are very much a user of the system and appreciate that opportunity. I think when people hear of schools doing this, you're imagining kids on a bus going to a basketball trip, football trip, but it's not just that. It's also part of the routine transportation. So you have a district like Carbon 2, which extends all the way from Medicine Bow down to Encampment. So very large area of routine transportation. And this isn't just big buses. These are Suburbans that are taking kids out to some remote locations in Wyoming, getting them to the Wyoming schools. In the absence of participation in WyoLink, then these transportation systems would have to look at other radio systems or cell phones. So for schools, it's really just about safety of our school children on the roads, and we appreciate the opportunity to participate and do support the bill.
Okay, any questions for the school boards? Thank you. Any further public comment? Anybody online? Okay, public comments going once, going twice. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move the bill. And do we need a second? Okay.
Sure.
I just would like to comment on the bill first before we get into it. You'll have to blame me for this bill because it was back in committee in the interim. It baffled me why it wasn't a cost of doing business for the state. Ever since I got in the legislature, this thing was stood up 10 years before I got in the legislature. I got in there, and for the last 8 years, we've been battling on how we're going to pay for this. I spent years on corporations, we dealt with it. I spent years on transportation, we dealt with it. And so I made a motion that it should become out of the general fund. It's a Wyoming statewide public safety communication system, okay? We have so many, as the director mentioned, the 500 agencies, you know, from schools to cities and counties and EMS and the patrol and just everybody that's using this system. It's incumbent upon the state to pay for this system because we've from the inception, I think we put just south of 200 million in it, right? It's, as far as the build out. We're certainly not going to abandon it now, I don't think. So we have to maintain it and we have to operate it for safety, public safety. That's one of the major things that government does. It's up to government to provide those types of services. So I believe it's a general fund, clearly a general fund requirement. I don't have any bones about that. The general fund should be paying for this.
Thank you, Senator. Go ahead, Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be a no vote on this, and I'll tell you why. I think the system has a lot of value to our state. I agree with that. But it is not the purview of this committee to allocate general fund dollars. I think that's to be done during the regular budget process. And so even though I'm in favor of WyoLink, I'm not in favor of this bill. So that's why I'm voting no, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments, Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Chairman Boner. So I've alluded to, I've been involved with this for a lot longer than I've ever been a senator. And this thing's been, well, frankly, just a giant rock hanging over your head, ready to drop. I think this was born by the state of Wyoming, this whole idea about having a WyoLink. And once again, it's an unfunded mandate to local governments, which I well know. I just would say that I want to make sure it's fair. I think everybody needs skin in this game. I can assure you that counties are in fact lowering their cost in some cases by this not being over their head. I mean, there's a benefit here. And I just want to be fair about it. But in all fairness, though, and the big picture is the state started this program, which, I kind of think it's their responsibility long before I got there. So I think it has to be dealt with. And I think it's probably the first step in actually getting somewhere. But it's a mess borne by the state of Wyoming, in my opinion. And I think the state and people in our position now have to deal with it. So that's my comment, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments, Senator Pappas?
Yes, just to my colleague from over the hill, and I certainly appreciate your thoughts, but I have to respectfully disagree. We here in this body, in the Senate, we do purchase lots of things. Services. I mean, we fund ETS, we fund all sorts of different operation requirements. We fund YDOT's RIS system. We fund all of these things. Certainly, this is going to go to the Appropriations Committee. They're going to make a determination, and then it's going to come to the body. So I think that we have to give this a chance to get through, and we can debate on the floor whether this should be funded out of the general fund and be a general fund appropriation. But unless you let it get to the floor, that debate won't happen. Oh, I respectfully disagree.
Any further comments? Okay, looks like we're ready to vote. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Brennan? Aye. Senator Furphy? No. Senator Kolb? Aye. Senator Pappas? Aye. Chairman Boner? Aye. 4 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, I think Senator Pappas volunteered to manage that one, so. All right, so last bill for our consideration, Senate File 35. So I think Wiley will be taking the lead on explaining this one, though hopefully it's pretty straightforward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, so the topic is Senate File 35. A little history on where this came from is we actually, those of you from Cheyenne, remember last year we lost a 13-year-old next to McCormick to the school where he went to school. And it's tragic. It's tragic for him, and it's tragic for the person that hit him. And not long after that, we had another incident in Lander where, thankfully it was not fatal, but it involved a young lady crossing the road and a vehicle hitting her with, we can talk details if you're interested, but the bottom line is, a lot of interest that came from members of your body in, are there things we can do better across this state to fix our crosswalks? And, when it started in judiciary, because this was referred from judiciary to transportation, the original discussion there was maybe we should increase the penalty on the legal side for somebody that got hit in the crosswalk. That did not pass. But where they went was, what can we do that would be helpful? And what the decision was is the bill that you see in front of us, which basically says, hey, listen, let's put some money where our mouth is, and let's try and address the issue, and let's try to make our crosswalks better across the state. Now, from our standpoint, we always think about, educate, we think about engineering, and we think about enforcement. So we think about the 3 E's. We've spent a lot of time in education. And Mr. Chairman, if you indulge us about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, I wouldn't mind sharing with you a video that we've pushed out to the entire state, to all the schools, about some crosswalk safety that we're asking for them to educate the children. Thank you. If you could run that for us, please, that'd be great.
So I apologize that the audio wasn't working. I'm sorry.
If we can't get it back, I think you probably got the gist of the intent there, but thank you so much for showing that. Mr. Chairman, so that's our focus on education, which we think is so key. Enforcement's always limited by the amount of resources a community might have. There's, in our town, and with 30 some, school crossings, I think we have 4 enforcement officers. And it's just not possible to always have somebody there. So you educate, you enforce to the maximum extent that you can. And then the next E, engineering, is really what this bill addresses is, hey, can we put some money to this and improve our system to make it safer? Whether it's an underpass or an overpass, or you saw the high amplitude, blinker that was on there, the Hawk system. So all of those become options, and that really then is that final E that becomes the focus of this bill. I might run you through a couple slides just in brevity that we sent down to you, because it might answer a couple questions for you. On slide 2 in there, not to go into any detail on any of those statutes, but what I'd say is, as we studied this issue in anticipation of going to judiciary, we could find nothing in terms of enforcement and current laws on the books that we would recommend changing. There's lots of laws on both sides of this, and you just got to pay attention. And so if you're a user, look both ways before you go. And if you're a vehicle, don't speed and watch out for what's going on. If you flip over to the next slide, on slide 3, you can sort of see on the bottom left that WYDOT maintains about 915 crosswalks across the state. Now remember, we're only a small fraction of all of the roads that are out there. In fact, right now, we're currently at about 20 some percent. But so the issue is way more than just WYDOT. If you look at the bottom right-hand side of slide 3, you'll see what the stats are for pedestrians that have been hit in crosswalks in 2021. And you'll see that if you're below 14, you were sort of at the high point. And then again, if you're in between 55 and 64, and with a nice sort of U shape in between there, you can see what the stats are on the top right there in terms of, hey, who has been killed, or who is, what are the stats in terms of traffic crashes. I think it is important to note that when you look at the definition of pedestrian, it's really not in a car or motorcycle or on a bicycle. So in other words, non-motorized conveyance, roller skates, wheelchairs, strollers, they all count as pedestrians. We certainly had 12 fatalities of pedestrians in 2021. And so that's too many. You can see that, about 88% were in urban and 12% in a rural. And some of those other stats may jump out at you. On the next slide, which is a bunch of stats, at the very bottom, you see the pedestrian location at time of crash. I think what I'd point out to you that the vast majority was involved in the roadway, not at a crosswalk. And so that probably speaks volumes for, hey, let's try and get people down to a crosswalk. But the interesting thing is the next highest then with 120 was people hurt at our marked crosswalk, which then goes back to the education, and is there something engineering we can do better in terms of that crosswalk? I think that a couple other things that you might ask us about, starting on slide 4, and I'd ask Mr. Mina, our state traffic engineer, just to add a couple comments here, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Joel Mina, State Traffic Engineer at WYDOT. We also, on the next crash slide, identified where a lot of these injuries are happening. And it's obvious it's happening in Cheyenne and Casper. You would think Jackson and Cody, those big high tourist areas where people are walking all over the place, that's not the case. Reason being, we have a lot of 5-lane roads and higher speeds. So one of the critical things on a school crosswalk, a school one, not just a pedestrian one, is to make sure the speeds aren't high. The speeds have to be below 45. School crosswalks are kind of the crux of this bill. On slide 5, we have a couple of pictures. I'm sure you've seen these. I've been working up in Douglas a little bit at one of these pedestrian hybrid beacons, and it's a model for the state on how to get those kids to and from school safely. And slide 6 is just a rundown of all the locations that we currently are working with the locals and studying segments of our highways for improvements for pedestrians.
All right, thank you. If you slip over to, slide number 7, there's an example of a crosswalk that was put here in Cheyenne down on College Drive opposite the LCCC next to the Sweetwater Grass Development. I just share that with you because there's now an underpass there, and what we really were happy with, this is an example of what we wish would happen all the time. A new development goes in, there's some excellent planning, there's some funding to put in a crosswalk, in this case an underpass, and Lord willing, there will not be an incident at that location because we have the right engineering that's been done. You might be asking, hey, how will WYDOT manage these funds if you pass this bill? Our current plan would be to use the same system that we have with our Transportation Alternatives Program. And you see those details on slide 8 and 9. I won't go over any detail except to say we have a very formal process where we take applications, we evaluate the applications based on a set piece of criteria. In this case, this bill actually defines criteria, so we would use that if you so decide to pass the bill to evaluate, the proposed projects, and then they would be put into the system to be built. The other item that I think is very important for us as we sort of talk about background here is that while we talk school crossings, a lot of this is actually what we would consider safe route to school. And so it could be that it's the intersection 4 blocks from the school that's the problem, but so many kids or pedestrians take that path that it's really important to say, yes, okay to fund that, and it may be out of the immediate school zone. Mr. Chairman, that's probably enough background for me, and would be happy to walk through the bill if you'd like.
Yeah, Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Yeah, so my understanding is that this certainly is for improvements to existing crosswalks and existing locations that may not have a crosswalk, we need to put one. But it's not intended for use under, say, new construction, a new school, or a new road that gets put in. I'm assuming under those situations that the funding would come out of whoever, appropriates the funding for the, like a particular school. We've had to do it on many schools. The one on Yellowstone Road at Davis, we put a hawk signal in there, required by the city. Actually required by WYDOT because that's a highway. But my question is that this $10 million is not to do that for future projects. I'm assuming future projects, the safety mechanisms and safety will be funded out of future funds. The intent is to go back and look at existing facilities and bring them into safer conditions. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, you are generally correct. So although I don't think that it's excluded from the bill, But to specifically or to point, the bill is very specific in terms of here's how you will prioritize the money. It starts on page 3 on line 15, and it really talks about, hey, listen, I want you to prioritize, the expenditure and distribution of funds for school crosswalks where fatalities occurred in the last 2 years, and then where there was an injury in the last 2 years, and then you flip over to page 4, any other school crosswalk where the department determines there's a need, and then crosswalk identifying transportation plan. So I really think from that standpoint, it would be very rare to see new construction, although I don't think it's excluded.
Any further questions, committee? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Chairman Boner. Yeah, it's the same stuff I'd seen in judiciary. We went through this, try to make a positive change, but what do you think you can do with the appropriation? Like, where would you, I know what the bill says and directs you, but what strategy would you take? Kind of take care of a few really high-risk areas, or would you try to spread it out and maybe make a broader impact over many areas? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I think that we would first ask for nominations for projects, and then we would evaluate according to the guidance given here. I think depending on the locations for where the projects come in based on this guidance, I think that what you'll find is the fix in some of these areas could be expensive. And so I would suspect if it rises to the top there would be fewer projects than more. But it all depends on what local communities want to apply for. And I think our going in strategy would be to say, hey, let's sit back, let's see what the requests are, and we'll go from there based on the guidance given from this body.
Any further questions for the agency? All right. Well, appreciate it, Director. I think we got a pretty good idea what the bill does, and don't need to go over it, and appreciate your thorough explanation. So any public comment on this bill? Come on down, ma'am. As a reminder, please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Welcome to Senate Transportation.
Year-old that they spoke about earlier. This is my son, Makiley Evans, better known as Mac. I'm here in support of this bill. I personally I can tell you that from a parent standpoint, this has been tragic. It's been awful, and I wish to see nobody else go through this. I started a nonprofit in our community to help with the funding in Cheyenne. I know that there are so many other communities in our state that can use the funding for this as well. I am out at McCormick Crosswalk no less than 5 shifts a week, and I can tell you what I see on a regular basis. I am a crossing guard there, as those children have become my world now too. I'm just trying to help these kids get across the street, and what I see with the parents, some of the drivers carelessly driving. We need to do better. And I think in our state, we have all these beautiful amenities. We have so many wonderful things. And when I listen today about budget talks and money being spent, what is more precious than our own families, than our own kids, and getting our kids to and from school safely? I've worked with MPO and our city engineers. I know what the costs of these things are, and I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have in terms of what these kinds of funds are that we're working on currently.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you for having the courage to testify here today. Any questions, committee?
Chairman Boner, thank you for coming in again. Thank you. I know it's not easy, but thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment?
Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association, and Mr. Fraser and I decided to come up together because the issues that we're talking about here are certainly community issues, impact our schools, impact our children, impact the safety of our communities. So certainly both of us are strongly in support of this legislation. And I do appreciate the way in which this project is designed. It's really just a start. It's not going to take care of all of the needs or all of the issues. If you're familiar with the schools in your community, there's no doubt you think about schools that are close to major roadways, that are close to challenging ways for kids to get to school. Department of Transportation has a Safe Schools Route program. Those are used by school districts as best can be to design safe ways to school. But at the end of the day, even with sidewalks, even with marked crosswalks, we need to be thinking differently about how to keep our crosswalks safe, how to keep our kiddos safe, how to deal with traffic in those areas to avoid tragedy, to avoid loss. And so really appreciate the way in which this approaches that, looking for different and innovative ways, particularly those related to our public highways. If you've ever driven through Grable, high school's right there on the main highway. You go through town here in Cheyenne, you'll find schools that are along those busy highway streets. But boy, how do we get people to slow down? How do we get them to recognize? Anybody who lives near school zones has seen speeding through school zones. And we need to find ways to do that. And I appreciate the innovation of this program to say, let's look beyond the traditional. Let's look for some ways that we can address that and keep our kids safe.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Farmer? Yeah, I guess I have one, just so I understand the background a little bit. Obviously, this is a Judiciary Committee bill. What's the general split right now is in terms of, paying for crosswalks? Usually a YDOT program is the school district, is the municipality. What's the breakdown, I guess, in terms of costs? It'd benefit me to understand kind of what the status quo is, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Pappas really alluded to the current practice. When we're talking about the development of new schools, crosswalks are generally considered as a part of the development cost of that. So when South High School was built, for example, there were several miles really of sidewalk that were put in for a new high school in a new area to create a safe route to school. That was part of the project design on that new program. But if we're talking about existing crosswalks, those become either municipal or state costs. That cost is borne by either the city or the state, and perhaps in some cases the county as well. But it is the signage. So you go along with that, and you have the reduced speed zones. There have been instances where boundaries on schools have changed or something like that, and the school district literally has no authority to remove a school zone. That becomes a municipal or county or potentially state decision. So we're really looking at something that's borne by municipalities by and large, next by the state.
Okay, that helps me understand. It's just like any other sign or, paint you might have on the road. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for the school boards? Thank you, sir. Mr. Fraser.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And I'm not sure I could say it any better than Mr. Farmer did and those that preceded us. We do work, we do work in concert with the schools and with YDOT. Many of our schools, as Mr. Farmer indicated, are built on state highways, or even if they're not right on the state highway, a lot of our communities are bisected by the highway, and children need to cross it to get to the school, whichever side it's on. So YDOT's been a fantastic partner. The school, I don't think there's any problems I'm aware of in terms of partnership. I love what this bill does because resources are where we come up short a lot. And as has been indicated, it could be argued that, that this is not enough, but it is, I do thank you for starting somewhere and for giving us an opportunity to take a better look at the safety. It was kind of a bad year in our state, and I think it's woken us all up. So I just like to say thank you for helping us to put some additional resources toward this. I'd take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fraser. Any questions for Wham? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. And I apologize, Senator Ellis walked in the room. I need to recognize her. Ma'am, do you have any testimony here? Okay, thank you. Okay, any further public comment? Come on down. Mr. Ryman, then we'll get to you next. So.
Mr. Chairman, I'll try and do this without a tear here. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to testify on behalf of myself today. This is certainly something that hit close to home as my boys attend the school that you just heard about. And I happened to drop them off along with one of their friends that you certainly know their father, Mr. Reddy McKay, in the governor's office. I wanted to just talk about quickly the genesis of this bill. Initially, the approach before the Judiciary Committee was to talk about penalties. I remember very distinctly one of our former commissioners, one of your fellow colleagues, Senator Tim French, said, I'd really like to invest in trying to prevent this from happening in the future rather than focusing on penalties that look at the past. And so that's what this is about, is investing in our youth, ensuring that they can get to their schools safely without harm. So I would certainly appreciate your support of this. I'm going to work to make sure that the commissioners come along with that. And I suspect that you'll be hearing from me later this week that the County Commissioners Association is fully behind this. But today I wanted to get up here as a parent and ask for your investment in this important activity.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Reeman? Thank you, sir. Okay, come on down. And just once again, as a reminder, anybody who's online, you might want to provide some public comment, go ahead and raise your hand so we can get to you. And it looks like we're slowing down here with in-person public comment. Ladies, welcome to the Transportation Committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
And we represent the Cody Youth for Justice Club and Park County School District 6.
We support this bill on behalf of Cody and its education system.
Yeah, we would just like to state, Cody, I think, is a really strong, what's the word? I can't, we're a strong candidate to apply for this grant money simply because we have a main artery, a part of a stretch of Bighorn Avenue that goes directly through our town that sees about just over 6,000 to almost 12,000 cars every day. And it's really close to our middle school. And we saw in 2021, one middle school student who was on their way to school who was actually hit in a crosswalk. So we've actually been trying to get YDOT to get some money just to build either an overpass, an underpass, a hawk system like you guys were talking about earlier, or just something a little bit more than just a regular white stripe crosswalk on Bighorn Avenue to help those middle school students. We had 15 crashes resulting in serious injuries on Bighorn Avenue last year. So it's definitely a concern for our community. And I think there's a lot of parents and families who are pretty concerned about this. But one thing that we heard from YDOT a lot last year was that there wasn't enough funding. So we just wanted to say thank you for bringing this bill and for bringing this money that hopefully will solve this problem in our community and hopefully around the state as well. So.
And I was also just going to add on that a good portion of the middle schoolers live right across the, there's a huge subdivision right across the highway, and a good portion of the middle schoolers just walk to school every day. And the nearest sidewalk is over 2 miles away, or the nearest crosswalk is over 2 miles away. And kids aren't going to walk 4 miles just to get over to the subdivision. They're just going to run across the road. And like I've had to do it before, and it's really scary. Just like, your chances of getting hit are really high, and there's not really any way around it. So yeah, my own 12-year-old brother actually crosses that street on a regular basis. And I mean, there's just been a huge expansion on the north side of Bighorn Avenue. So we've seen the majority of households now on the north side of Bighorn Avenue have school-age children who cross on a regular basis. And that really wasn't the case 20 years ago when the middle school was built. So, I mean, this really has been a pretty recent problem, but definitely one that's worth recognizing now. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for your testimony. Excellent job, by the way. Any questions, committee? Okay, thanks for coming all the way down from Cody. It's good to see you, and once again, great job
Thank you.
testifying. So, any further public comment? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, I admitted Stephanie Bell.
Okay, Ms. Bell, you have the floor whenever you're ready. Go ahead and turn on your microphone and your video and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Boner and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to zoom in today from Cody. Proud of our students that just spoke. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Stephanie Bell. I'm Vice Chair of the Park County School Board. I also am the Chair of the Park County School District's, as we join with the City of Cody in a working group. And it was due to my work on Bighorn Avenue that I was appointed to the City of Cody's Urban System and Traffic Committee. This committee has entered its 18th month of a corridor study on Bighorn Avenue. Bighorn Avenue, as our students just spoke to, is a state highway, 14A. It's a 5-lane traffic corridor that runs less than a half a block from Cody Middle School, just north of it. And as our students alluded to, over 10% of our student population lives in the area just north of Bighorn Avenue. So in January of 2021, the year that they just spoke of from YDOT, a Cody Middle School student was hit by a semi-truck while going to school that morning. And by the grace of God, this student got up and he ran to school. The truck driver did not break any laws. He stopped his truck. He was devastated because he couldn't find the student that he knew he had hit. But as I said, he didn't break any laws because on this very busy traffic corridor, there are no traffic devices. There are no stoplights. At the time, there were no crosswalks. YDOT initiated, so as we have started this corridor study, YDOT initiated a testing crosswalk in September of this year as part of that corridor study. And as the City of Cody Urban Systems and Traffic Committee anticipates our final recommendation, I recognize that funding, like the funding that's allowed in this legislation, to permit a permanent crosswalk. But that crosswalk probably will not be installed for at least 18 months, just due to the normal process of budgeting. So that would be potentially the fall of 2024. So this legislation affirms the value of our students who simply want to walk safely to school every day. And I do appreciate the question earlier about whether or not this funding would be made available to existing corridors like ours, or whether or not we would be disqualified. And so I hope to speak to just the timeline of how long it takes a community like mine to speak to a danger and initiate in a process. We can't get a school zone unless we demonstrate that we have enough students who will cross a five-lane highway. And so as we continue to work through this, I hope that the committee understands that there are communities like mine that have worked very, very hard to get to the point where we would be considered for a school zone, and we certainly want a permanent crosswalk. Without funding like this, that CMS student who survived that day may be a senior in high school or maybe a graduate before we have a permanent solution on Bighorn Avenue. Thank you so much for your time and your interest. I hope that you will support this, and I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Any questions? I'll appreciate your testimony before the committee.
Thank you.
Any additional online comment? Okay. All right, sounds good. Going back to the room, any additional comment? comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, moved by Senator Furphy. Second by Senator Pappas. Any discussion, committee? Okay, let's call the roll.
Senator Brennan. Senator Furphy. Senator Kolb. Senator Pappas. Chairman Boner. 5 ayes.
Okay, that passes. Do I have a volunteer to take this bill and floor manage it? Yeah, we will. Yeah, we will. Yeah, we'll definitely go before appropriations, so. Any volunteers? Okay, Senator Furphy. You're 2 for 2 so far, so, or maybe more. Okay, so any further discussion? Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned until Wednesday.